Hey everyone, Knight here. The topic of time travel has always been fascinating to humans. It's probably due to the fact that we are just as fixated on the events of the past as we are of the future. Just imagine traveling to the past, or imagine someone from the future showing up through a portal in your home. I will be telling you 5 stories of creepy interdimensional travel. Each of these stories will follow up with the time travel caught on tape. Enjoy. On a seemingly normal day in 1954, a seemingly normal man allegedly flew into Tokyo. But upon landing at the Tokyo International Airport, his seemingly normal trip had taken a very drastic turn for the weird. When he handed over his passport to be stamped, the man was immediately interrogated as to the whereabouts of his origins. It wasn't a case of racial profiling. While his passport looked authentic, it listed a country no one had ever heard of, called Tord. The mysterious man claimed his country was located between France and Spain, but when he was asked to point it out on a map, he pointed to the Principality of Andorra, insisting he had never heard of Andorra and that Tord had existed for 1,000 years. He claimed that he was in Japan on business, something he had been doing for the past 5 years. His passport seemed to back up his story, as it was covered in previous customs and visa stamps, and he carried with him legal currency from several European countries. He even had a driver's license issued by the mysterious country and a checkbook containing checks from an unknown bank. After more interrogation and confusion for both parties, the traveler was sent to a nearby hotel until an official decision could be reached. There, 2 immigration officials stood outside the hotel door until morning. It was then that they discovered the mysterious man had vanished without a trace, which was troubling, since the only possible exit was a window with no ledge 15 stories above the busy street. The Tokyo Police Department conducted an extensive search but continually came up empty-handed. Hopefully, if he was really from a parallel Earth, he was able to find a way back to the comforts of his home in Tord. In this first video, it appears to be a portal appearing. The video is captured on a vehicle's backup camera. The portal begins opening as a horizontal swirling mirage appears in front of a concrete wall. 2 males come walking out of the portal. Then a second portal opens and 1 male walks out. The person that captured this video claims to believe it's 100% true. You see for yourself. In 2006, as Carol Chase McHenley was driving from Paris, California, back to her home in San Bernardino, she claimed she decided to stop in her hometown of Riverside. It didn't take long, however, for Carol to realize she wasn't in the right town. Although its geographical location was correct, she claimed she couldn't find her childhood home or those of her other family members. In fact, she didn't even recognize any of the houses, even though all the numbers were still correct. Even the cemetery where her grandparents were buried was just a fenced lot full of overgrown weeds. Was she simply in the wrong town? This would be a strong theory had she not found some landmarks that were familiar, such as the college and the middle school. However, her relief in finding something recognizable was short-lived, as she soon noticed the eerie vibes surrounding the Riverside residents who were walking around. She soon left, afraid to approach any of these sinister beings. Carol believes she had stumbled upon a parallel dimension in which Riverside was a much darker place. Her story can't be confirmed because when she returned to Riverside a few years later for her father's funeral, it had reverted back to the town she knew as a child. She never encountered the alternative dimension Riverside again. At this soccer match, the camera will pan up to the crowd. In the crowd, you can see an individual running at high speeds through the stands. This is thought to be a time traveler warping into a portal. Check it out. In July 2008, a well-educated 41-year-old woman named Lorena Garcia woke up in her bed on what seemed like an ordinary day. However, as she went on with her normal routine, she claimed she found small details that seemed peculiar. For example, her sheets and pajamas were different from what she had remembered wearing to bed. She resolved to brush off the curiosity and drove to her place of work, where she had been employed for 20 years. However, upon arriving at her department, she realized it wasn't actually her department, despite being in its usual location on its usual floor. Having decided that something weird was definitely going on, she returned home only to find the man from who she says she had separated 6 months before, who acted like the separation had never taken place. Her new lover, who she claimed she had been seeing for 4 months, was nowhere to be found. Even after hiring a private detective, his whereabouts remain unknown. There was no trace of him at his alleged residence, nor any traces of his family. While it seems more likely that Garcia's perceptions are the result of some neurological malfunction, she believes she woke up in a parallel universe. Unfortunately, for the alleged dimensional traveler, Garcia has not been able to return to her normal universe, leaving her stuck in a dimension where she doesn't belong with a boyfriend she can't get rid of. In 2006, a Swedish man named Håkan Nordqvist thought it would be a good idea to climb under his sink when he crawled into a portal and momentarily traveled to the year 2042. He was able to meet his 72-year-old self and capture video. Look at the matching tattoos. In May 1972, four girls were allegedly driving back to Southern Utah University after spending their Saturday at a rodeo in Porchy. While crossing the desolate Utah-Nevada state line at around 10 p.m., they came upon a fork in the highway, where they veered to the left and began driving through Gallatin Canyon. Suddenly, the black pavement turned into white cement. Believing they had simply taken the wrong turn, the girls headed back to the way they came. But to their surprise, they were suddenly driving past grain fields and ponderosa pines with no desert in sight. They decided to stop at a roadside tavern to ask for directions, but quickly changed their mind after one of the girls began screaming hysterically. Four egg-shaped vehicles mounted on tricycle wheels with bright lights shining from the top of them began speeding after them. The petrified girls sped back through the canyon as the white cement changed back to its normal black asphalt, leading them into a familiar desert. After wrecking at a creek, leaving them with 3 flat tires, they waited until morning to hike to Highway 56, where they flagged down an obviously skeptical state trooper. As outlandish as their story seemed, the tire tracks they left are difficult to explain. The only tire tracks left by the girls' Chevy ended abruptly only 200 meters into the desert, which leaves the mystery of how the girls ended up over 2 miles north of the highway with no physical evidence of their travels. The car was also missing a hubcap that was never located. Maybe it got lost somewhere in the Utah desert, or maybe it was being displayed at a museum on the parallel Earth. In the CCTV footage, you can see a young man walk across an intersection in the early hours of the morning. A vehicle that is not paying attention drives head-on into the man. The man appears to drop into a portal and away from the danger of being hit by a car. The Markawasi Stone Forest lies in the Andes Mountains in Lima, Peru. The stones are almost like sculptures, taking eerie shapes like human faces, but no one is sure how they formed. As if that isn't spooky enough, the real mystery is the possibility of a dimensional door that is said to be located in the forest. According to Dr. Raul Rios Centino, an investigator of the unexplained in Lima, a patient came to him about her extreme case of hemiplegia, a disorder that results in a complete loss of motor function in half of the body. When he inquired about the woman's condition, she revealed that she had been camping with friends in the Markawasi. According to the patient, they had gone out exploring late in the night and happened upon a torch-lit stone cabin filled with dancing revelers in the 17th century attire. The woman said that she felt an otherly world pull toward the cabin, but she was yanked away by one of her friends before she could fully enter. The accident left the side of her body that had entered the cabin paralyzed. Her test results revealed no discernible cause for her paralysis. Centino believes the woman experienced a dimensional shift, producing a change in her nervous system's energy flow. Many natives, as well as scholars, believe that the dimensional doorway exists in the stone forest of Markawazi, which the woman and her friends may have unknowingly crossed. Hemiplegia may not be a great consolidation prize, but had she not fallen away, the woman may have been lost forever. This piece of footage shows a woman what appears to be talking on a cell phone. The thing that makes this footage very creepy is that cell phones were not invented for another 60 years. She displays all the same mannerisms as someone talking on a cell phone. You take a look at the footage and decide for yourself.
Fascinated with the idea of time travel for hundreds of years, and while many quantum physicists say it's perfectly plausible, we have yet to create a real, working, time travel machine. However, over the years, there have been several reports of people actually time traveling, some even by accident. From top secret programs to cell phones in the 50s, we count down 10 incredible time travel cases that just may change the way you think about time travel forever. Billy Meier in Jurassic Park. This guy claimed that he made friends with aliens, hopped on their spaceship and traveled way back to the Jurassic era. He even claimed that he managed to take a snap while he was in the past. The image is hard to make out, but it does look like a pterodactyl flying above. He later went on to explain exactly how time travel is possible, although it gets pretty deep. He said that this advanced race of extraterrestrials can manipulate a unit of time called a chronon, so that they can travel both to the past and to the future. John Titor's futuristic predictions. John Titor hit the headlines when he claimed to be a military time traveler who was reporting back from the year 2366. He made several vague predictions. Starting from events that were due to happen in 2004, there was quite a buzz surrounding him. However, many of the events failed to materialize, which led to many believing this was some sort of elaborate hoax. A special investigation even claimed that they found the people who made it were brothers from Florida. The legend lives on, and you can still visit their website for more information on the predictions. Andrew Carlson, don't believe the hype. So, Andrew apparently said he came from the year 2256 when the economy had collapsed, and he said he was the one to come back and save it. While it certainly attracted a lot of media attention, the whole thing turned out to be hoax that one of the newspapers were actually in on. So, Andrew didn't actually save the economy, but he did manage to pocket himself some media fees in the process. Cheeky. What makes the story weird is that he actually disappeared in the year 2014 after apparently making $350 million from $800 worth of investments. Maybe he did know something we don't. Montauk Project Air Force Station. Perhaps one of the most famous time travel conspiracies of all time is that of the Montauk Project. In fact, the hit series Stranger Things even referenced it in the storyline. Several credible sources have come through to talk about their experiences at the now closed Air Force Base. Stories include being transported back to the 1940s, as well as being involved in very strange experiments and alien meetings. Disaster struck in the early 1980s when an experiment went horribly wrong. Many of the participants were apparently brainwashed in order to wipe their memory of what happened. Freaky. The Man from the 19th Century. One newspaper story from the 1950s was about a man who was hit by a cab in Times Square and killed. However, the official at the morgue found a number of odd belongings on his person. These included a letter, which dated back to the 1800s, old banknotes, as well as a copper beer token, which was also from that era. None of the objects showed any signs of aging. He was also dressed in 18th century clothes. The legend of Rudolph Fentz lives on as one odd tale of time travel. The historic hipster. This one is pretty weird. Smack bang in a crowd of people from a more historic era is a guy wearing modern day clothes, with his hoodie, t-shirt, and sunglasses. He certainly stands out from the crowd. However, no one seems to notice this mysterious time traveler. While the photo has made the rounds on the internet, many people mark this to be a hoax, which has been done with a little help of Photoshop. Take a peek at the photo and see what conclusions you can draw from it yourself. Victor Gard, seeing into the future. Victor's time travel experience is a bit creepy. He was a well-respected military pilot who was out flying off an abandoned military runway. When he flew back to the airport, he noticed several people in yellow and blue clothing working on airplanes in the runways. It shocked him so much that he decided not to land there because he thought it must have got the runway. It turns out the British Royal Air Force actually had mechanics wearing red and blue working on the planes in the same spot, but not until several years later. The mini Chinese watch. Take a look at the image and you will see a teeny tiny watch which is carved out of stone. The mini watch was actually found in a tomb and is believed to be around 4,000 years old. You can even make out the time on the watch, 10:05. It's certainly a strange artifact to find from the Ming Dynasty. Archaeologists were left baffled, and no suggestions as to what it is or exactly what it means have been made yet. Some people put this photo down to Photoshop, while others insist that it is the real. The time traveler's phone. So, way back in Charlie Chaplin's time, when he was filming, there was a video which caught an individual apparently nattering away on a mobile phone. The video does clearly show the person talking into some sort of device which shouldn't have been invented during that era. Some scientists claim that they must have got hold of some sort of hearing aid gadget, although others say, why would they be talking into it when there is no one around? Watch the video and make your own decisions on this one. Back to the Future. This story is quite a stretch of the imagination. A man from Sweden believes that he accidentally time traveled to the future after fixing the kitchen sink. Seriously. He believed that a wormhole opened up which allowed him to hang with his future self. His future self was 80 and chilling on a beach. Luckily, he had his phone on him, so he recorded the strange meeting before he came back through the wormhole to his normal reality. The older man actually had exactly the same tattoo, so it was a bit freaky. Take a look at the video online and see for yourself.
What's up, everyone? Stern Whistleblower here. This is my office. Here's one of my employees. Hey, Donald, what are you doing?
Oh, I'm just, warning people about traveling back in time to change things, about how bad it's going to turn out.
Okay. Have you talked to Elon Musk yet?
Just a couple of times.
Make sure you talk to him about the simulation theory, because this is a fucking video game.
Elon Musk, you can eat the dust of my shoes. I am the scientist on this.
Yes, he's one of the.
Let
He's
Elon know that before he comes to see me.
okay. You got your time traveling sheets done,
Yes,
correct?
don't show
Okay.
that to Elon.
Okay, I won't.
Tell him he's the dust.
I won't. Over here, my day. This is where this is my quantum computer. This is how we time travel right here. This is our quantum computer. Google or YouTube. Donald, if you don't pick up the pace, I'm gonna have to let you go. So just pick up the pace over there.
Put you up to that Elon Musk.
Yep.
Dust boy Elon.
And Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking, Wormman, Bubblegum.
Yep.
I'll push him over in a wheelchair. He never time travel, or maybe he did, but I'll fuck up from him.
Here's
Тебе что ничего? Нормально, нормально.
Ну что, давай тогда еще разок.
Заболти еще.
А?
Тебе что ничего?
Ну что, давай.
Moss Audio presents Time Travel, A History by James Glick. Read for you by Rob Shapiro. Your now is not my now. And again, your then is not my then. But my now may be your then, and vice versa. Whose head is competent to these things? Charles Lamb, 1817. The fact that we occupy an ever larger place in time is something that everybody feels. Marcel Proust, about 1927. And tomorrow comes. It's a world. It's away. W. H. Auden, 1936. Chapter 1. Machine. Being young, I was skeptical of the future and saw it as a matter of potential only, a state of things that might or might not arise, and probably never would. John Banville, 2012. A man stands at the end of a drafty corridor, aka the 19th century, and in the
Believe it or not, there have been cases of teleportation that have shocked many people worldwide. And no, we're not talking about teleportation shown in movies, but the ones caught in real life. Like always, there are hoax videos out there on the internet, but within this countdown, we only show the realest ones caught and recorded by humanity. So with this being said, sit back and prepare to be amazed, because here are 5 teleportations caught on camera and spotted in real life. Let's begin. Number 5, teleporting car. The video you're about to see is one of the best evidences of real life teleportation or time travel. Inside the clip, a car is not seen coming from anywhere, but seconds later the car being shown stops as another one interferes, appearing out of nowhere. Many say that this video is as legit as it seems, but what do you think? Here it is.
Kan jag gå ifrån köket? Hon skriker nu.
Number 4, dog teleportation. In the next small footage you're about to see shows a dog teleporting out of thin air that takes place in an illegal race on the highway. The spectators recording the video were surprised that the dog was alive, as they don't know where the dog came from. Here it is. Number 3, teleporting old man in a bike. The video you're about to see was uploaded in Russia in 2012, and even though there isn't much information about the video, you will clearly see that the old man in the bicycle is seen coming out of complete nowhere behind the other man's back. Some people say that the bicyclist was already behind the other man, but you can clearly see that he wasn't. What do you think? Well, here it is.
Нормально, нормально. Нормально.
Number 2, teleporting from destruction. You might have seen this clip on my other Angels caught on camera and spotted in real life video. The clip shows a superhuman person or angel-like sighting that saves a man on a motorbike from complete destruction by teleporting him a few meters away in less than a second, and then flees from the scene as quickly as possible. But enough with the talk, here's the footage. Number 1, unexplained teleportation. What you're about to see is from National TV News of China that shows an anonymous person randomly recording when all of a sudden a mysterious person comes out of complete nowhere with blue lights coming from the fish. The person recording looks in complete amazement, runs after him and tries to record him, but then the mysterious person teleports and flees away. There are many opinions on this one, but we would like to know yours. Here it is. And there you have 5 teleportations caught on camera and spotted in real life. If you liked the video, make sure you drop a like and share it. And if you're new, subscribe down below to get notified almost every single day with new videos from Top 5's finest. Thank you so damn much for watching, and until next time, we are out.
According to Professor Ben Tirpitz, traveling through time is not outside the realms of possibility. From Doctor Who to Back to the Future, time travel has been a staple science fiction technology in movies, books, and TV shows for years. But could it really be possible to travel into the past? People think of time travel as something fictional, said Tirpitz, a maths and physics instructor from the University of British Columbia. And we tend to think it's not possible because we don't actually do it. But mathematically, it is possible. The key, he argues, lies in Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity, which states that massive stellar objects such as stars or black holes actually distort both space and time. To show that time travel is possible, Tirpitz has created a new formula which focuses on the way in which these massive objects cause the very fabric of the space-time continuum to curve. The time direction of the space-time surface also shows curvature. He said, "There is evidence showing the closer to a black hole we get, time moves slower. My model of a time machine uses the curved space-time to bend time into a circle for the passengers, not in a straight line. That circle takes us back in time." The physicist, however, does admit that putting this into practice is currently impossible. While is it mathematically feasible, it is not yet possible to build a space-time machine because we need materials, which we call exotic matter, to bend space-time in these impossible ways, but they have yet to be discovered, he said. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more content. Corsair out.
Hello, my name is Alfred Bielik, more commonly known as Al Bielik. Original family name is Edward Cameron. We thank you for acquiring this CD. And the purpose of it is to present my history as I've researched it over the years, as I have learned it, as comprehensive as it can possibly be. I have been involved in the Philadelphia Experiment, the Montauk Project, time travel, alien connections at the Montauk Project, and some other projects, all of which have been secret over the years, most of which have never been declassified. The purpose of this CD is to give you a base of information, as I have found it. Certainly not everything that may be known on these subjects, but all that I have acquired, which is over 11 years. When I first became aware of my involvement with the Philadelphia Experiment in January 1988, I had no idea how extensive my use, shall we say, by the government has been, nor where my research would go. I have been involved in many radio presentations, over 50, such people as Art Bell, Mike Siegel, Mr. Jarvis, and others. And in terms of direct presentations before a live audience, over 50 around the world, extensively in the United States, in Europe, and in Australia. The subjects covered have been from the Philadelphia Experiment, the Montauk Project, mind control, some discussion of aliens, and related subjects. And they all fit together. We're trying to understand how they fit together, and the complex web which is involved is really the purpose of the CD, so that you, the viewer, may get some better idea of what information you have been denied by our government, been denied by the media, with a few exceptions, and give you a base of information so you can do your own research. Those of you who may be skeptical, because frankly the presentation is going to become rather bizarre as we go on with it. For those of you who are skeptical, well, I say fine. It is quite healthy to be skeptical, which means you don't accept either I or any of the other presenters on the CD say at face value, but go do your homework. If you don't quite believe us, which is, as I say, quite healthy, do your own homework, your own research, and I feel confident that eventually you will understand that what we are presenting is the truth. But that is for you to decide. The purpose is to educate. The purpose is to get you to think. The purpose is to help you to understand things which you may have wondered about for years and which you have had only very sketchy information presented to you from other sources. We will go into the history of the Philadelphia Experiment, how it overlapped eventually into the Montauk Project, the people who were involved. Other presenters and myself will be such persons as Preston Nichols, who was heavily involved in the Montauk Project, Stu Swerdlow, who is also involved in the Montauk Project, and connections with aliens. And they all overlap and interlock. Another man who is involved in the Montauk Project, Larry James, who, by the way, it is not his real name, but at his request we will not use his real name. Many other people have been involved, but in many cases we have not been able to get their consent to an interview. And of course, many of the people involved in these projects in the past are now deceased or have, shall we say, vanished into the woodwork. As the case may be, we will go on and present to you as best we can the history as I know it, and give you some food for thought. Many of these projects lasted many years. The Philadelphia Experiment, for example, did not begin in 1943, but began much earlier, in 1931, and involved many people. A principal among them was, of course, Nikola Tesla, and there were many others. Many people have made contributions to many of these research projects. I was involved also during the war years, not only with the Philadelphia Experiment, but Los Alamos and the Atomic Bomb Project. I've been involved in many projects. And if you want to look some of these up, you're welcome to use the website. If you type my name in as Al Bielik on the website, you will find something today of over 1,800 hits. So that might keep you busy for a while. As for Preston, he's on the web also. Stu Swerdlow's on the web. Larry is not. There are other people. There are other sources of information. There are many others who have published on something which they know about either the Philadelphia experiment or the Montauk Project. Unfortunately, I'll have to say some of this may prove and does prove to be disinformation. But you, the viewer, must decide. How do you separate out information from disinformation? That has been a classic question for a long time. It takes a lot of research. It takes a base of knowledge. You have to start someplace. Continue to acquire knowledge and information on the subject, and as you do, eventually you'll start to see a pattern. The pattern may emerge as disinformation. If it does, that's fine. You then throw away the disinformation, continue, you will eventually come up with the true information. I'm not saying it's an easy process. It is not. I've had to do it myself. In the process of uncovering information and on my own memories, at first you come up with memories that you swear are true, but then you find that there's some distortion. You didn't remember exactly all the details. And it takes a great deal of time and a great deal of depth of research and going back time and again into your memories to find out what really happened. In order to correlate your own memories, you have to have other people who were involved at that time or have memories or information, hard information in some cases, of what occurred at that time. It takes a lot of work to eventually come up with a complete, or at least, if not complete, a true story insofar as you know it. So that is what basically I'm presenting here, as well as the other presenters. The purpose is to educate you as to what has happened, what has been covered up, where the government has deliberately covered up information, covered up complete reports, covered up complete experiments, a complete history, such as the Philadelphia experiment. The Montauk Project, relatively few people have heard of, yet the site still exists on the eastern tip of Long Island, and you can go out there personally and view what's left of the buildings. Today they are in the process of being torn down, but 1 year ago they were almost all there. Hard research does show a lot of hardware and a lot of artifacts, if you will, which support the evidence we will present. The evidence will be in many categories. There will be hardcore evidence, there will be many pictures, there will be presentations by myself and others detailing the history as we remember it. And there will be also some documentation, perhaps after the main presentation, showing other areas of research you might engage, other references, of which there are a few, and where you might go for further information. We hope that your journey through this CD, which is going to be an extensive one, will be a happy one, will be one of education, will be one which will give you a further insight into history which you may not otherwise have had, and otherwise will not have because the media is not touching it. And quite aside from the movie The Philadelphia Experiment, which was close to the truth of what happened, but of course, not blaming Hollywood, they have to present a story, and of course it was embellished with a typical Hollywood love story and other aspects which did not quite fit the facts. But for those of you who have not seen The Philadelphia Experiment, the movie, it is out there both in CD and in the older form VHS video. If you have not seen the commercial movie, I suggest it's worth seeing. It doesn't give you the whole truth, but it gives you an insight. And as you progress through what I have to say and others have to say, you will eventually learn that those who did the movie definitely knew, at least to some extent, the facts of what happened. Doing this and viewing other things in terms of other presenters, you will eventually come to an understanding of the real history, which I might add is not easy. We welcome you to this bit of work. There is a lot of evidence here. There's a lot to be presented, and I think you will find as you go through it some very interesting information and some insights which you have not seen before, would never perhaps have ever seen, were it not for this CD. Good luck. Thanks very much.
Ed Cameron's, now Al Bielek's, journey through time started when he jumped off the USS Eldridge in 1943 during the Philadelphia experiment. Both he and his brother Duncan Cameron landed in the year 2137 and remember waking up in a hospital bed. During that stay, Ed alone traveled to the year 2749 and spent 2 years there. In this program, Al recounts his memories of that trip. Al, can you describe what the civilization was like in the year 2749?
What I saw of this civilization was a highly advanced civilization and technologically. We had floating cities, we had ground-based cities. The floating ones are anti-gravity type flotation. 2,100, 2,200 stories, like the cities are 2.5 miles high. And in retrospect, I have looked at that and says, now how the blazes, with any materials that we know in the 20th century, how could they build anything that would sustain that kind of weight from the stories above it? And of course, it was explained to me at that time in the 28th century that it was very easy to explain because they had had full control over anti-gravity and multiple systems of anti-gravity in which they built platforms of every 300 floors approximately. And they would relieve the strain of the pressure from above with an anti-gravity reverse system so that the pressure from above disappeared. So that each section only had to support its own weight. And they kept adding sections as they built this city up to 2,100, 2,200 stories. And in addition, if they wanted the city to be a floating city, it was a floating city. And they would move it around from one part of the earth, if we got tired of it, to another part of the earth. They were interested in that. And I told them about the system of governing, if you will, which was a totally synthetic system, actually, synthetic intelligence computers. They were moderately interested in that. I said they had one in each city. Whether the city was fixed, which there were fixed cities doing manufacturing and so forth, or it was a floating city. Why they had floating cities moving around, I don't know, but that was a civilization as it was then, or is to be, if you will. And I started to ask questions. I had friends there, and I stayed long enough to learn all about the functions of the city and the fact that this synthetic intelligence was a highly radioactive crystalline form structure, so far as I could tell, because I was called in for an interview, and to be interviewed you had to put on a lead-lined suit, completely radiation-proof, because in the room where this computer was, where you were interviewed, which computer, if I can call it that, was a huge crystalline structure floating in the middle of the room. No physical connections to anything we could see. And it would interview you telepathically. And I was called in for more than one interview. And I gathered the structure of the society at that time was purely socialism, 100% pure socialism. Everything was free. There were no banks, there was no money. You were born into the society by your parents. Your parents could be living in a common law arrangement. They could be married. You could be raised by your parents, or you could be raised by the state.
Well, what did the computer want to know from you?
Eventually wanted to know what I was doing there and what I knew about how I got there. At that point, I didn't remember anything about how I got there. It was sort of like I arrived and became part of this city, part of the society, like I had been born in it, but which was not the case. There was some false memories involved and a huge block as to where it had been, how I got there, what was I doing there. I sort of absorbed the place and became part of me, and I became part of it, so to speak. And one tour guide I became very friendly with, as I found out much later.
Isn't that what you were? You were a tour guide, weren't you?
I became a tour guide of sorts because I adopted this profession. Everybody was expected to get an education, a minimum education, and then, of course, contribute something to society, do something useful. Whether it's manufacturing, being a tour guide, a scientist, an engineer, whatever, manufacturing.
What did you give tours of?
The city, basically.
To
because
tourists?
People came to these cities from elsewhere on the planet, and they would like to see all of the workings, particularly the floating cities.
probably seen this video where a so-called angel saves a man from being hit by a truck by teleporting him to safety. It's pretty damn good, but is a well-known hoax. But it makes you think, could something like this actually happen? Although it sounds hard to believe, there are too many stories going around of people claiming to have travelled back and forth in time to be ignored. And since many professors and scientists have said that it's theoretically possible to time travel, then it cannot be ruled out as something that just happens in the movies. So here are 5 truly interesting cases that, although do not prove 100% that time travel has happened, they will definitely get you thinking. The Montauk Project. The Montauk Project is the name given to a series of secretive United States experiments that were conducted at Camp Hero in Montauk, Long Island. Now, it's thought there were many mysterious experiments conducted at the Air Force Base, such as psychological warfare, mind control, and extraterrestrial contact. But the one I want to talk about is the claims of time travel experiments and the consequences it had on the people involved. The project first started in 1943, not at Camp Hero but in Philadelphia, where an attempt to create technology that would allow military vessels to become invisible was being worked on. The experiment was conducted on the Navy destroyer USS Aldridge, and it's claimed that the ship was bombarded with so much electromagnetic energy that it disappeared and then re-emerged for a few seconds off the coast of Virginia, before reappearing miles away in Philadelphia. The consequences of this experiment were tragic, because despite the ship itself being undamaged, rumour is that some crew members had died and were found fused to the metal parts of the ship. The few members who did survive the supposed teleportation were all mentally damaged, but the scientists and military officials were still keen to continue with these type of experiments, believing the potential was enormous. Congress apparently were unwilling to fund any further research, so it was decided that a secret installation would be created so the experiments could continue. The site that was chosen was an abandoned Air Force station codenamed Camp Hero, situated in Montauk, Long Island. The installation was completed in the early 1960s, and by the 1970s, an array of bizarre experiments were being conducted in the underground facility. It's claimed that young men were being kidnapped and made to sit in specially developed chairs that were bombarded with energy waves, apparently enabling scientists to control their subjects' minds, allowing them to manipulate reality and focus their thoughts so intensely on subjects that they would physically materialize in front of them. The more experiments that were carried out, the more enthusiastic the scientists became. Wormholes were apparently being created so time travel could be tested, and by the 1980s it was all getting out of control and the project was finally dismantled and all of the outcomes were kept classified. It's said that employees and participants were brainwashed before they left so they would not recall what went on, and to this day there are conspiracy theorists who believe experiments are still being carried out deep underground at the base. Nowadays the service area is a state park, however it's believed the US military still own the ground beneath it. So I wonder if anything is still going on down there, or if anything went on there in the first place. Some say it's all a hoax that's been exaggerated over the years, and others say the tests did happen and time travel and teleportation techniques took place. What do you think? Sir Victor Goddard. For some, the name Sir Victor Goddard may sound familiar. He was the man who published one of the most famous paranormal photographs around, the Freddie Jackson Ghost, which is of his squadron in World War I. But he is also known for his amazing so-called time-slip experience. Goddard was a senior commander in the British Royal Air Force and had a distinguished military career in the First and Second World War. He was even knighted in 1940, so when he wrote an article in his local paper in 1951, claiming he had travelled through time, it came as a bit of a shock to those who knew him. Goddard reported that in 1935, when he was flying from Edinburgh back to his airbase in Andover, he made the decision to fly over an abandoned airfield in Drem, located just outside of Edinburgh. When flying over, he reported that the base was battered and in a state of despair, with abandoned hangars, overgrown runways, and even cows grazing there. Not long after, he claims he flew into a storm and describes how fierce winds and strange browny-yellow clouds caused his plane to spiral. He managed to gain control and avoid disaster, but the storm had caused his plane to spin around, and he found himself heading back towards Edinburgh. As he approached the abandoned airbase again, he realised it looked completely different. The hangars were intact, the runways were clear, and 4 brand new planes were parked on the site. Goddard instantly recognised 3 of the planes as biplanes, but the 4th was a monoplane, a plane that in 1935 the RAF did not own. Also, all the planes were painted yellow and the ground staff were in blue, which were colours that were not standard in the Royal Air Force at this time. As Goddard changed course back to Andover, he claims he encountered the strange storm again, but this time he was prepared and managed to stay on track and complete his journey. Immediately after the incident, Victor spoke freely about his experience with friends and family. But he faced skepticism, and for fear of being ridiculed and looked down upon, despite his knighthood, he was reluctant to talk about the incident again until the newspaper articles released in 1951. It was a further 4 years before Goddard would see the airbase now renovated, with the new RAF colour scheme of yellow planes and blue overalls on ground staff, just like he had seen. So, had this well-respected military man actually travelled through time from 1935 to 1939 and then back again through this storm? Or is there another explanation, like him being disorientated or making the whole thing up? One thing's for sure, Goddard strongly believed until his death in 1987 that he was one of the privileged ones who got a glimpse into the future. This next one is a little hard to believe, but is well documented and certainly isn't the first time something like this has happened. It's a time slip story, which is an incident in which a person appears to travel back in time to experience a past event. Well, on January the 2nd, 1950, 55-year-old Miss E. Smith apparently did just that. She was attending a party in the Scottish town of Brechin, and after consuming a few cocktails, she left the party and drove towards her home in the village of Lethem. Driving conditions were not great, as it was pitch black and a mixture of snow and rain made it an unpleasant journey, and after driving around 2 miles, her car skidded off the road and ended up in a ditch. Miss Smith was unharmed, but had no way of contacting anyone, so she had no choice but to walk home. About 8 miles in, and now 2 a.m. at night, she could see her village in the distance, but could also see torches in the field to the right of her. As she walked closer, she said they looked like Pictish warriors with reddish flames emitting from their torches. By now, her dog who was with her was growling and reluctant to go any further. After watching for several minutes in amazement at what these men were doing in the field at 2 a.m, Miss Smith said they were turning over bodies on the floor looking for their own dead. What she is believed to have witnessed is the aftermath of the Battle of Nectan's Mere that took place in 685 AD. Warriors defeated the invading Northumbrian army in that location and would have walked around afterwards looking for their dead. So was Miss Smith just confused from a car accident and after walking 8 miles, or did she really experience some kind of time slip that allowed her to witness the aftermath of the Battle of Nectan's Mere? The Torrid Man. The story of the Torrid Man is fairly well known, but is fascinating nonetheless. It started in 1954 in Tokyo's Haneda Airport, when passengers disembarked from a plane that had just flown in from Europe, and a well-dressed man handed over his passport to be checked. The passport did not appear to be in the usual format, and after further examination by the passport officer, it appeared that the man was from a country that did not exist, a place called Taured. After being questioned by officials, the mystery man explained that he was a frequent traveller and had flown to Japan on several occasions for business, and the stamps on his passport proved this. When asked where Taured was, he explained it was a country between France and Spain, and when asked to point to it on the map, he pointed out an area near Andorra, and became distressed when he was unable to find Taured. But things get even stranger. The man produced details of his trip, but when the officials checked with the company on the documents he had no knowledge of him. His hotel reservation was also non-existent, so we have no idea what he was going to do once he left the airport. Confused officials decided to hold him under guard at a nearby hotel while they made further inquiries to figure out what was going on. But by the next morning, the man had disappeared from his guarded room and has never been seen or heard of again. There are a few conflicting stories, but that is the official one that apparently came from the man who checked his passport. So who was this man from Taured? There are many theories, the main one being that he was a time traveller from another dimension or parallel universe. But some say he could have been a con artist with a fake passport, or that the whole thing is made up and never even happened. What do you think? Unlike the Torrid Man case, this next one is not well known. It happened in September 1974 when a man believes he was teleported 200 miles, or 321 kilometers, and lost over 5 hours of time. The unidentified man was traveling alone from San Diego to pick up his wife and son from Alabama to bring them back to their home in California. He drove east to follow what seemed the quickest route on the then State Highway 10, and just before midnight he arrived in Phoenix, Arizona, where he filled his car with fuel. He continued on Highway 10, and after about 5 miles he could see a bright light on the horizon. As he tried to concentrate on his driving, the light became more intense and he found himself staring into it. At this point he felt disorientated and decided to pull off at the next exit. He pulled over and saw a sign for Gila Bend, and realised he was in Gila Bend, Arizona, over 321 kilometers from where he had just filled his car up 10 minutes ago. The man has no recollection of the 321 kilometers or 200 miles he would have had to travel, and also realised he was missing 5 hours and 20 minutes of time, yet his fuel gauge was still showing full. Believing he had zoned out and that the gauge must be faulty, he drove to the nearest gas station and attempted to refuel his car, but it took less than half a gallon before spilling over. To this day, the man has no memory of those missing hours and no explanation for what happened, although he believes the light in the sky could have something to do with it. Is it possible that he just zoned out whilst driving, was somehow teleported through time, or was he abducted and had his memory erased? Since there is not a whole lot of information on this case, I don't know what to make of it, but there are tons of stories of people who have reported similar events, where they have travelled miles without realising it and seem to have lost a few hours, but who knows? What do you think is going on? So that's 5 cases of believed time travel and time slips. I hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you next week for another video.
One day, wandering around that hospital and hospital grounds, I disappeared from that era and from 2137, and I wound up in a still further future date. By what means, who arranged it, who provided the transportation, I don't know. It was obviously a form of time travel. The interesting thing about it was that Duncan was not with me. He remained behind at 2137, as I found out later. I wound up in the 28th century, and this was in a time period at 2749 to 2751 AD. Talk about changes in civilization, society, and everything else. It was drastically changed from what we saw in 2137, as this is now 600 years later. The cities were enormous. The cities were beautiful. They had ground-based cities, much as we have always had them, but they also had something else. Floating cities due to anti-gravity techniques being perfected sufficiently that they could float an entire city, which is perhaps not as large as any of our current cities. It was round, or very nearly round, but it floated on this platform and they could move the city any place they wanted, remaining floating in the air, 4,000 or 5,000 feet above the ground perhaps, or a little less, depending on what they wanted. But the size of the city was vertical rather than horizontal, 2,200 stories high. That's about 2.5 miles. And I learned about this and looked at this, and I said to myself, because I befriended some people in the 28th century, how do they support this? The strength of materials, anything we know, and I'm sure in this era, is inadequate to withstand the load of all of those stories above the ground of the lowest level. And they said, quite true. I said, well, how do you do it? And I says, well, very simply, it's about every 300 floors, we put another anti-gravity platform, which relieves the weight of all of those sections above on the section below, and they do this for every 300 stories or so, and you break it up into 300-story sections, which is not impossible by even today's strength of materials, but by future strength of materials and advances, no problem whatever. So they would divide it up, and the weight load was only on one level, and then below it was independent in terms of load, though they were all well attached. And by that means, they suspended the load into a distributed form, which made it very feasible. The cities could move anywhere on the planet. Basically, they stayed hovering and floating. Or if they didn't like a particular location, they moved somewhere else. There wasn't that much traffic in moving cities, I can assure you, because the world population in that era, the 28th century, was only 500 million, and I was instructed later that that was where they had held it for centuries. There would be no more than approximately 500 million population. Some of the features of this, let's start from the political standpoint. As I learned, all of these cities, whether they're ground-based cities, which the majority were, because they had to do manufacturing, they had to have agriculture and various other things to supply the needs of civilization. But all of them, whether floating or ground-based, were rather interesting in their governmental form. They had essentially no government. There's no government as we know it today. There was no money, there was no banks, there was no political jurisdictions, and it resolved down to what would be best called a city-state structure, where the city is the state. And any other cities from that one are independent and operate in their own independent manner. So that was the major change there. There was no elected government, there was no appointed government, there was no government as we had ever seen it in the past. As I found out, each city was run by an intelligent computer, synthetic intelligence, synthetic consciousness, a highly radioactive crystalline structure. Who built them, I had no idea, nobody seemed to know, but they've been there for hundreds of years. And this computer ran the entire city. There were guidelines set down, there were law books, but no courts. There were guidelines set down as to how you were to behave, what your parameters were. Within these parameters, anything went. Anything was not considered kosher within this realm, this parameter limit would be expressed as a yellow zone, i.e. a zone that you don't want to go into and you don't want to become involved in that type of behavior. If you got out into that area, you were given an invite for a reprimand to the computer, which there was one in every city, running each city. You would literally be called in for, shall we say, an interview or an audience with the computer, and you would be advised that you had broken the law, but it wasn't considered a felony, it was a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor as such, if you were judged guilty, you were sent off to one of the work camps for whatever purpose they did in the work camps. It would be much like today, I presume, where any kind of labor, menial or otherwise, had to be done was done. And that was compulsory, that was not voluntary. If you were called in because you had gone outside the yellow zone into what is called the red zone, which is basically what you would today call a felony offense, you were immediately called in for an interview. You were examined, looked at, talked to, and if the computer at that point thought that you were rehabilitable, that you could learn again to be sociable and within the social bounds of normalcy, you were given one more chance. If the computer decided that you were not capable of fitting into society, you were terminated right then and there. Now, there were other people who didn't feel like they could fit into the society, but had not yet committed any of the so-called offenses. Literally, they were allowed to leave. The word was, if you don't like it here, go live somewhere else. Go out in the boonies if you want. Live as a hermit. We don't care. And many did. I do not know what percentage. I was told that quite a lot of people had left the cities and gone out in the boondocks. Whether they formed communities or not, I never did find out. The technology was so advanced on that you had, for transportation within the city, what they called accelerons. Consider it very much like a moving walkway as we have today, except that when you got on it, you could literally jump ahead and move in a form of suspended gravity at a very high rate of speed along this beltway. And when you got to a point where you wanted to get off, you just literally jumped off. And the kids loved to play with this sort of toy. They considered it a toy. To some extent, they were always getting in the way, but to them it was great fun. As these accelerons went across, even in the sky cities, across open spaces. In the interior of the city structure, there was a fairly large open space. Eventually, I got my turn to talk with the computer. It was part of what was called the Llama systems, and why that name was chosen, I don't know. But it was a fact that every one of those computer installations, though independent, was tied together on a network not known by most of the city dwellers, which included every city on the planet. So that there was cohesion between the computers, cooperation, and generally they kept track of each other. I spent almost 2 years in this very large complex. I traveled around a lot. One of the other things was, yes, there were railroads, but they had changed a lot. They were now for the purpose of excursion, having fun. And go out on one of these excursions, it was a big party. The rail was much wider than our current rail system, perhaps 2 to 2.5 times wider to accommodate a much larger car, much wider. And with that, of course, they had literally rolling dining rooms, rolling ballrooms, and could have a great time and great fun, literally traveling from one city to the other with no other purpose other than having fun and taking a trip somewhere. If you weren't required to work, which no one was required to, other than their social obligation, which was well inculcated into the kids, that you had an obligation to contribute to society, to pay for what you have been using and had inherited, for which no money was involved. A sort of credit system was still functional, but otherwise, except for fairly large credit purchases, if that is the right term, they didn't really keep track of very much. It was considered quite free as long as you were able to make some contributions and nobody overloaded the system with demands. That happened very seldom, that there was an overload of demand for goods or services. So as a result of that, there was very little abuse of the system. Now, in this period of time, talking with many people, making friends, I had a number of questions. Who built this computer system? That was my first and foremost question. Who maintains it? What happens when it breaks down? Very common questions. No common answer, and very much uncommon answers. First question about the cities, who built them, who maintains them, who maintains the computers, was rather hard to answer and get an answer to. No one really knew much about the history of the construction of the city or how it ran, other than the computer And you couldn't request an interview. You couldn't request to go in and ask questions. If it wasn't busy with something else, okay, come on in. But understanding, of course, that this was a highly radioactive device, it was a radioactive crystalline structure, you had to wear the equivalent of a lead suit, a radiation suit, much like NASA has today, except there was some lead material added to make sure that you were not affected by the hard radiation. So you could go in and have an interview and ask a lot of questions, and I did more than once. I got some answers. I would say they were always satisfactory. But I did find out eventually that a number of interesting things. While there was no longer a military, now I'm speaking of the 28th century, in any of the city structures and any of the data information of this computer complex, because they did interconnect and did, just like an email net or another computer complex, there were a lot of people on the line giving information and taking information. The aspect of how these computers communicated with each other was unknown. But it did make, the one I talked with did make a number of interesting statements over a period of time. They had been around for about 250 years in this format and this system. There was no one to do any maintenance. Apparently there was no maintenance as such. If one of them broke down, it was simply replaced. But I wasn't satisfied with some of these answers. I started looking further. Didn't find much for a while. Then all of a sudden I got an invite to come visit with another group, a human group, which I did. And then I found the answers to all of my questions. All of the questions I had in mind, they were able to answer. Number one, who built the computer system? Well, they said they did. And the project was started about 2600 AD. And it was basically an experimental system for the purpose of seeing if they could run an entire civilization by computer. And also provide full socialization, i.e. everything is free, but also in the educational system or process inculcate the idea that people have a moral obligation to do something for the community because the community had supported them, therefore they have to help support others in the community, which didn't work most of the time. In a smaller community, it works much better than in a larger community. You get cities of well over 1 million population, it's very difficult to get something like this to work and be usable on a consistent basis. Well, that was one of the questions I had. There were a lot of others. I asked about the military aspects. No, there was no more military. Well, how do you defend yourself in case somebody comes along, has a lot of hardware, a lot of munitions, a lot of military clout, and wants to take over a city or the whole planet? How do you prevent this? Or do you? Well, the answer was rather complex, but basically it came down to the fact that they had hidden weapon systems in the cities. Not every installation was a city, but they had all of these installations all over, and they were well concealed. They were not described to me as exactly what they were, but they said they were capable of deflecting and defending a city from an invasion from outer space. And there was no data given as to whether or not there had been any such attempted takeovers in the past. But at that time, we saw nothing resembling any kind of an attack, any kind of a threat. It was very peaceful. And it's perhaps because of that peacefulness that people were basically so happy there. It was, you might say, the end result of a long dream about a pure socialist state. They had it, and it seemed to work. There's only one fault with it that I saw, and this is something which I have discerned since I've been back after many years. You get a city or a group which is purely socialistic, no money. How do you keep that group together? How do you keep the society together? In that case, you're looking at a situation where it's partly by the will of the people, partly by, shall I say, some kind of internal control, and partly because one could say there's no little choice. If you don't want to live in a city, you go out in the boonies. If you don't know how to survive by yourself, you stay in the city. Survival skills were not something that was commonly taught in those days because all the technical problems of breakdown of equipment have long since been solved, and the equipments generally were working and continue to work for about 200 years without much maintenance. The maintenance was required was definitely directed by the intelligence in the computer. Systems existed for doing repairs and maintenance. And of course, if they had manufacturing systems, they had to have maintenance systems to service the manufacturing equipments. All of what was manufactured, I don't know. There was definitely a lot of agriculture. But on the surface, in the periphery, basically, of some of the surface cities. Some of the agriculture went outside the city limits, outside the periphery of the city, but not a lot. They seemed to produce more than enough food for what they needed, which was good, because there was no problems or threats of food shortages. The idea of a threat to the survival in a civilized society had long since faded, because the people were so well cared for. But the herein is also a problem. These people were well cared for by a socialist system,
They didn't have to work to do anything, even though they were expected to work and expected to contribute to society. It was not demanded. The things I saw in this society and civilization were at first unique to me, and I would say not only without precedent, I had no comparison, no basis from the memories of the 20th century, because at the time of my arrival, my memory of the 20th century was wiped out. All of the comparisons I have done have come since, because at this point I'm able to compare what I saw at that time with what I know, of course, of the 20th century. But it was sort of strange in that I didn't know really why I was there. I didn't know that I had any connection with the Philadelphia experiment or anything else in the past. But there I was, wandering around the city as one of the regular inhabitants, occasionally taking trips out of the city, which were a lot of fun, and meeting this group who built the computer system. Now, as they told me, this was an experimental system, a sort of an experiment in social behavior, not necessarily behavior modification, but social behavior to see whether they could build a city and have it be run by a computer after setting down certain parameters of what you do or don't do in a society in which you have a city, or even a smaller community. It was obvious to them, as it was to me, that the experiment was largely working. But my questions in retrospect, meaning from the viewpoint of now, and from what they told me also, yes, it is an experiment, but they do not know if it'll succeed. Because one of the problems that develops when you have pure socialism like that, which is working, and that everything seems to be running smoothly, you have no incentive. No one has an incentive to go out and do something new. Nobody has an incentive which says you must try something like this to make a better living, so to speak. You didn't have to make a living. Everything was provided. You didn't have to get an education. And this, of course, put at that point already a severe restriction on original research because people weren't interested in doing it. So they didn't. And eventually, the society appears, it fell apart. But certainly it was at its peak point, I would say, right around that time, 2900 AD, and probably was for some time after that. But the group that designed and built this system built all of the computer link-ups, and occasionally one would go bad, because I was there just before I left for one had gone sour, and it was removed at a later date, I believe. But I did learn the name of this group of people who were essentially the designers of the whole system, the computer system, the city structures, the city setup. They call themselves the Wingmakers. Now, some of you may have heard of the Wingmakers group. It certainly has turned up on 20th century computers, 20th century runs, and a lot of data has been turned out, hundreds of pages in some of the manuals, describing the discovery of their stash in New Mexico in about 1974, in which the only thing they found, which was out of place for an 8th century AD Indian burial mound, or Indian burial of whatever, the item that was totally out of context was a compass. It resulted in NSA becoming involved with this, descending on the site, sealing it off, and looking to see if possibly what they were looking at was actually an alien type of installation, an alien crash, or whatever. They did not ever find any evidence of aliens. In fact, they didn't find enough evidence to support any thesis. So they closed it down, and after an earthquake in about the year 1994 approximately, a wall disappeared due to the earthquake, and they had a tunnel, an artificial-looking tunnel, which went to a circular staircase carved right in the rock, which was quite obviously artificial, and 23 rooms off that staircase in that long tunnel, all of which contained relics of some civilization that was advanced, paintings, and in the last room, the 23rd room, was a laser disc, an actual optical disc, much like what we have today, except the coding in it was such that it could not be decoded. Make a long story short, it took a year and a half of one of the experts there in languages, 20 languages, and so ancient Sumerian, and somehow got the clues from the pictures on the walls, 23 rooms, 23 pictures, all paintings, and all in good shape. They finally cracked the optical disc, and they who had made the disc and left it there stated very clearly that they had left this stash in 800 AD approximately, 8th century, and there were 6 more like it around the earth, 7 total. The object was for man to dig these up when he got to the point where technically he could do it and understand what was there and learn their concerns about civilization. Well, one has been found. That was in New Mexico. There are 6 more. There are rumors that a second one has been found. But of course, the first one was totally under the control of NSA, National Security Agency. Underneath the basic organization was another one called ACIO, Advanced Contact Intelligence Organization. They are the ones who apparently pull all of the rare and exotic research involving finds which might look like aliens, but proved in this case not to be. It was a time travel operation. And that is the group which is set aside to do it, and there's a special group within ACAO known as the Wingmakers Group, which was working on this project and keeping it very, very secret. They identified the group that was as having come from the 28th century, originating in the 28th century. They called themselves the Wingmakers, which is what I remember, and they were interactive with this time period also. That is the 20th century into the 21st century. They did not give me any indication at the time when I was in the 20th century that they were interactive with the 20th century, but I got the distinct impression that I had not seen the last of them from the various things they said. I have not seen them since, I might add. Not in any physical sense, unless it was by accident, because there was no communication. And it might have been an instance where I saw some of their people, 3 of them, in a men's health club on one Sunday afternoon in Atlanta about 2 years ago. No communication with anyone, not even communicating between themselves. The group was telepathic. And whether it was them or not, I don't know, but I have a suspicion. They were too genetically perfect to have been of this time and this era, so they could have been. But since then, the indications have been via the internet, and that information which was dropped on the net, 2 interviews out of 5 that have been given by Dr. Anderson, a pseudonym, but one of the senior workers with the language capability that cracked the optical disc, found an outside person to take some interviews, 5 in all, and translate them into a material which could be put on the internet. He wanted the material out. Well, 2 got out, and some other material, and that was the last I ever seen or heard of either Ann or Dr. Anderson. There's no answer at this point as to whether or not those 2 people are still alive or dead, what's happened to them, and the other 3 interviews have never appeared on the internet. There's enough that has appeared to make a very substantial story and a very substantial indications that these guys were not flakes. The section on philosophy alone is enough to really stir one, and the pictures are very, very strange. According to those who found them, on the walls, they were still in very good condition and repairs. This is from the 8th century to the 20th century, which is 1,200 years. And there was very little deterioration, and for that matter, there's very little dust in the rooms. But they found some means to protect them further. I mean, the CIA does have some rather advanced technologies available to them, and NSA, and they made some further attempt to preserve the paintings. What they did, I don't know. But what is interesting is that the other stashes have yet to turn up. And they insisted from this one optical disc that there were 6 more, and when the time was right, they'd all be found. They were very concerned about the survival of humanity throughout this very critical period of history, meaning the 20th century into the 21st century. Now, in retrospect, looking back at them and the things they said, and what I now remember, they were not convinced, in my view, that the socialist experiment was a success. It was a success to a very certain degree in terms of the local time period and the local era, and perhaps in terms of what problems had developed prior to their starting this experiment, i.e. the collapse of, or near collapse of civilization and trying to rebuild in the period after 2137, 22nd century, up through the 26th. I had no indication of the history in that period as to what transpired. Nothing was discussed with me. I got the impression that it was not exactly in very good shape. There may have been other problems that developed in the interim, but by that time of the 26th century, they got a handle on synthetic intelligence, and they decided to go ahead and rebuild civilization using what they called the Lama system, the system of intelligence, created in a crystalline form, consciously aware, and having certain other abilities which would normally be classed as metaphysical. These computers were able to do things which perhaps some of our best gurus would have trouble doing. Manipulation of matter, manipulation of time by these computers. So they were not unintelligent. They were very intelligent. But they had no ethics or morality as we understand them and as we use them. So my question to myself, or perhaps to anyone else, is, are these guys looking now, perhaps, for another solution? Obviously, we learned in this century that if there is no competitive spirit, if there is no desire to succeed, if there is no pressure on an individual to learn, to do something constructive, to succeed, to help build some little corner, a brick or 2 in our civilization, without that pressure, people don't do anything. And if you suddenly wind up in a situation where all of your needs and wants are granted for free, and you don't have to go out and work for them, you don't have to do something to go get them, you don't have to cut down trees, go out and skin animals for their furs to survive, but suddenly everything's handed to you on a silver platter. Yeah, at first it seems great, and will work for a while, but after a period of time, it's going to fall apart. And I think they were at the point where they're beginning to realize that this was going to happen. Now, from that point, after nearly 2 years, I was told I had to go back. And I said, go back where? What for? It says, well, you came out of the past and there are certain problems back there that were unresolved and you have to go back and solve them. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't at that point remember my involvement at the Philadelphia experiment. That was brainwash number one, if you will. And the lama, the local one, kept insisting, you must go back. And I said, I don't want to. He says, you will go back. And I did. But before I left, during that 2-year period, I met somebody who became a very close companion. He happened to be a tour guide because there were a lot of tours in those days. And tour guides, of course, were necessary to take people around and show them the sights and show them some of the old cities. New York City was a museum, if you will, as were some other the old cities from the 20th century, those that survived. And they made very nice museums out of them. New York was sort of the model to show how people lived in the 20th century. A great deal of it, I did go on that tour, a great deal of it was still intact, most of Manhattan, not all of it. Brooklyn and Queens were essentially destroyed, and they didn't make any attempt to rebuild it because the destruction was too heavy. But the concrete and steel of New York, of Manhattan, and some of the other buildings adjacent to Manhattan survived, and what little damage there was repaired, and they made a very nice museum of it. You can go through it and tour it, see the underground subway systems. I don't think they were up, as I remember, they were not operational, but everything was there. Made a very interesting review of history from the standpoint of those of the 28th century. What we take for granted today, of course, they didn't. And at that point, I did not have my memory of the 20th century, but as time went on, it came back after I left the 28th century. They said I had to go back, so I was sent back. And of course, this raises the question, were they the ones who brought me up there in the first place? I certainly didn't have any hardware handy to do it. I certainly had no desire to go to the 28th century. I knew nothing about it. So I went back to 2137, and Duncan was there, and I was imbued with the idea we had to go back. I had no idea how we were going to go back, and I wasn't even sure at that point where. But we did go back. We were sent back to 1983. The early morning hours, approximately 2 a.m. of 12 August 1983, inside the chain link fence at Montauk Point, and this searchlight came down from a large helicopter, and MPs, quite a number, came out and grabbed us and took us to the building where when we boarded an elevator, went down below, and then of course met Dr. John von Neumann. At the point of our return, however, that is to 1983, a great deal of the memory of the other elements came back. At this point, I'm still not sure how much of it came back, but quite a bit of it did. And when we were returned to the Eldridge by the crew and the system at Montauk, nearly the time tunnel, and we're back in the Eldridge, and it was back in the harbor, and we wound up in I wound up in the 4-day Board of Inquiry. Duncan jumped overboard and went back to the later part of that century, the 20th century. But after giving my report, of course, I was not believed. In retrospect, I can understand why I was not believed. Because who in the year 1983 is going to believe a story about 1943 is going to believe a story about 1983, much less about further on in the future than that? It would be hard enough to understand 1983. It's only 40 years, but enormous changes took place, far more than would ever have been normally expected. And let us say the mental projection of what comes on after 1943. Nobody expected such rapid development of aircraft, of automobiles, of highways, of freeway systems, of electronics, of computers. Of course, in 1983, computers were not in the form to any extent of personal computers, as is today the case in the year 2000. But nevertheless, computers existed, and they were proliferating in every way and every respect. But then to add a story about 2137, I'm sure that was a little bit too much. They thought I was a little bit ill and I had gotten some radiation sickness. Nobody said that, because I gave a very coherent report, but I'm sure they might well have been thinking it. Duncan was not there to back me up, unfortunately, and he went on back to the year 1983, late 82, early 83, we're not sure. I say I'm not sure because those records we didn't dig out until after the Montauk Project collapsed, and it was in the 90s, 95, 96, we were able to find out what happened to Duncan. The rest of the story of Duncan we were able to finally piece together was rather bizarre in its own way. When Duncan and I were sent back to the Eldridge to destroy the equipment, which we did, and the fields were collapsing, it took over 2 minutes for them to totally collapse, and we found the 2 sailors buried in the steel of a deck and the steel of a bulkhead for the other 2. And I went over to talk with Brother Jim, who was crying and dying and did die. Duncan became so dismayed by all of this that he headed for the railing and looked back at me like, well, aren't I coming along with him? And I implied no, so he jumped overboard. And as we found out later, he wound up back at Montauk, not at the same point in time, 12 August 83, but considerably earlier, and became part of the project and did a lot of work for them. The records indicated, that is the records after the year 1983, that in one of the time tunnel operations that he was involved in, he did a no-no, something that was strictly forbidden, is that for reasons they didn't understand, occasionally side tunnels developed. And their orders were never to go down the side tunnels, because they didn't know why they were created, how they were created, or where they went. And the order was, don't take a chance, don't go down them. Well, you don't say that to Duncan, not as he was then. So he did go down with the side tunnels and wound up in the hands of aliens. And they demanded of him that we want a certain piece of hardware, like what? Well, they told him there's a certain power package, a crystal, aboard that UFO, which is buried in the underground there as part of the Montauk Project. We want that crystal back. And Duncan says, well, I don't have anything to do with it. I says, well, you will go back and get it, or you will send somebody back to get it. And frankly, we'll just keep you here and hope that somebody finds out you're missing and sends another person here, and we give them the message. So eventually the message got back that Duncan had a problem, and that the solution was to remove that large crystal, an energy storage crystal, on the UFO. It was, and it was delivered there, and Duncan was released. But by that time, the damage had been done. His time locks had been broken, and he was aging at an extremely rapid rate. Now, you may ask, what is a time lock? We're referring to that ambiguous item which involves how is a person, a new soul, or an old soul, doesn't matter, that is taking possession of a body that is in the process of being generated from the fetus onward. How do they lock into that particular body? Well, there is a connecting link, but there's also a connecting link to that point in the time stream as the reference point that this is where the person's life begins, both physically and in terms of the attachment of the soul. When the body's gone and the soul is free, they can travel up and down the time stream if they want to, and take a body at some other time frame than the next slot, so to speak, after they died. And occasionally this happens. But in any case, Duncan wound up dying, slowly but surely, aging very rapidly. The station personnel and those who were able to do age reversal and already had that equipment there because they used it on me later, apparently couldn't reverse him fast enough to keep it from overwhelming them, and in spite of their best efforts, he was continuing to age. So time tunnel to the rescue, namely Montauk, back to locate father and warn him and tell him that Duncan was dying. You can't have this happen because of the time stability problems. Get busy and make another Duncan. So he married his fifth wife, a legal marriage. First job on was a sister, and the second one was Duncan. That was in June 28, 1951. Now, for some very complex reasons, the soul of Duncan could not enter that body directly at that time of birth. Normally that's what happens, this most of the time. Could not, so they had to have a surrogate soul. And there's a surrogate soul was found to inhabit that body as a perfectly normal functioning body, which it did. And Duncan, number 2, went to school, acted like a very bright youngster. I have pictures of him in that phase at that time. Duncan does not want them to be shown publicly now. And he grew up to the age of 12. And according to information acquired later, at the age of 12, on the 12th of August, 1963, the surrogate soul was kicked out and the real Duncan came in. His mother had reported a very sharp change in the personality in the time period of the age of 12 in July, August. That, of course, didn't mean anything to us until, it was like reverse engineering. We reverse engineered what happened to Duncan. And we found out, rather in a strange but actually very conclusive way, when the project collapsed in 1983, Duncan was off of it, I was off it, Preston, many other people. But Duncan had a lot of psychological problems as a result of his involvement with the Montauk Project and the Montauk Boys. And eventually he came to seek help from someone he was told could help him, namely Preston Nichols. Now at this point, of course, he had been brainwashed, that is, debriefed, just as had Preston, as had I, as had everybody else who survived that operation. And he didn't know Preston when he walked in the door. Preston didn't know Duncan. But he says, first of all, he had some hi-fi equipment he wanted fixed, which Preston was in the business of doing. And then a matter of discussions that went on after that point. Preston asked him a few questions and says, well, it sounds like you have some problems. If you're willing, we'll try some deprogramming and we'll try some hypnosis on you. So about 1986, he hypnotized Duncan and took him back gradually from the period of the Montauk Project to the age of 12, in which everything seemed to be normal as going to be expected, and hung together, and so forth. Then they took Duncan back and said, let's go earlier. Well, they did a quantum leap jump to the decks of the Eldridge. This is what was reported to me by Preston after the hypnosis session. And was on the deck, and he says, I'm on some strange ship called the Eldridge, and so there are people here that I know today. And I says, one of them is Al Bielek, and they named some others that didn't mean anything to me. And the aspects of the Montauk Boys program. But at least we had determined what had happened, and that Duncan, we knew, that I met at that time as Al Bielek, was essentially the same Duncan, except that there was a body change. And by the same father, the body came out very nearly the same. Different mother. But that was a long and harrowing experience trying to dig all that out, and we did. Preston, of course, was having problems with his own memories, and to this day he has asked for help, and he says, I don't know anybody that can deprogram me. I can deprogram everybody else, but who's going to deprogram me? He says, I want to get clear of this also. That was a very interesting statement on his part, and of course, today he doesn't do too much about it because he's had to drop all the deprogramming efforts because he got into, shall we say, some difficulty with the military over some of his deprogramming efforts with some of the local boys and the sailors and the military people and non-military people on the Long Island area. He had quite a reputation, Preston, I mean, and people sought him out. And today he won't do any deprogramming. He's in other areas.
First start out by saying that most of you are not going to believe what I'm about to say. That's fine. I'm not trying to convince everyone that what I'm saying is true. I'm simply trying to speak to those of you who will listen. Now, you've probably seen those old photos of people supposedly talking on modern-day cell phones. Some have claimed this to be proof of time travel. It's not. These devices are actually hearing aid instruments. With that being said, time travel is soon going to exist. You may live to see it. I was born 3 years before the first time machines began being tested. They started out dangerous and unreliable, only used by the government. Eventually, independent hackers figured out how to build them. I have been recruited by an independent agency to spread the message that our world is a fragile one. Your children and your grandchildren will not have the same amount of resources that you do. The Mars colonization program was only semi-successful, as few people want or have enough money to move there. The world I was born in has become extremely overpopulated. I was born in 2026.
to Apex TV. Today, we take a look at an ancient Greek sculpture of unknown authorship. It is believed that this sculpture was made at around 100 BC, and it currently resides in a museum in Malibu, California. What makes this sculpture unique is the fact that it appears to display something astonishing. It depicts a mysterious object that bears striking resemblance to a modern laptop. Now, we can see in this photo of the object that it is quite wide. However, it is not wide enough to be a jewel box. This is not to say that laptops existed in 100 BC. However, it could be indicative of something even more strange. Conspiracy theorists have claimed that this sculpture may be proof of time travel. What do you think? Does this ancient Greek sculpture show a real laptop? Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below.